They thought they found a lost baby by the lake, but what they uncovered was a government secret worth killing for. On an unusually crisp morning in Maple Hollow, Kentucky, 17-year-old twins Caleb and Sadie Johnson wandered along the quiet edge of Elkhorn Lake, the surface still and silver beneath the waking sky. It was supposed to be just another lazy Saturday, no school, no obligations, until a faint whimper stopped them in their tracks. Tucked beneath the gnarled roots of an old sycamore tree, half covered in a woolen blanket and nestled inside a worn wicker basket, was a baby girl no older than a few weeks. Her tiny fist clutched the edge of a hospital tag etched with the name Lily Grace. Sadie's heart clenched. Caleb stared in stunned silence. There was no note, no sign of who had left her there. Just that name, that cry, and something in Lily's dark, unblinking eyes that made them both realize this wasn't an accident. It was a warning, or maybe a message. What they didn't know then was that this child wasn't just abandoned, she was hidden. And by taking her in, they were about to reopen a buried history their parents had died to protect. Caleb and Sadie Johnson had lived their entire 17 years in Maple Hollow, a sleepy town tucked deep in the hills of Kentucky, where the roads curled like river veins, and everyone knew your middle name. They were fraternal twins, born minutes apart on a rainy April morning, and though their features differed, Caleb with his lean frame and quiet, observant eyes, Sadie with her wild auburn curls and fierce, unfiltered energy, their bond was unshakable. Orphaned at the age of 6 when their parents died in a mysterious fire that was ruled electrical, they had been raised by their great-aunt Eleanor in a weathered farmhouse on the edge of town. While the rest of Maple Hollow moved at the pace of rustling cornfields and Sunday church bells, Caleb and Sadie often felt like they were living in a town suspended in amber, unchanging, heavy with history, and unwilling to move forward. Caleb was methodical, a thinker, always building things in the barn or sketching blueprints for machines no one would ever see. Sadie, on the other hand, was fire and instinct. She questioned everything, challenged everyone, and never backed down from a dare. On weekends, they'd escape to the woods behind their house, hiking toward Elkhorn Lake, where the silence was softer and the air held no judgment. That Saturday morning began no differently. Caleb carried his sketchbook. Sadie, her backpack filled with snacks and a flashlight just in case, and the two ambled past the trees talking about graduation, about leaving town, about anything but what waited back home. But as they reached the edge of the lake and saw the outline of a basket nestled beneath the old sycamore, something shifted in the air, a stillness like the world holding its breath. In that moment, they had no idea their ordinary life in Maple Hollow was about to shatter. The sky above Maple Hollow was still painted in soft shades of lavender and gold when Caleb and Sadie Johnson slipped out of the creaky screen door just after 6. School wouldn't start for another 2 hours, but this early morning ritual, walking the wooded path to Elkhorn Lake, was the one place time seemed to bend just for them. Their boots crunched over damp leaves as they moved in tandem, silent for long stretches, then suddenly bursting into quiet arguments about which one of them would leave town first after graduation. Sadie, of course, insisted she was heading straight to New York the second she could. Caleb didn't say it out loud, but he wasn't sure he wanted to leave at all. The lake came into view through a break in the trees, still half shrouded in mist, the water smooth as glass. The wind was calm, and even the birds seemed hesitant to break the silence. Caleb paused at the edge sketchbook, clutched in one hand, his other brushing along a moss-covered rock. Sadie skipped ahead, boots splashing through shallow puddles, until she stopped dead. "Caleb," she said, her voice low and sharp, almost breathless. He looked up and followed her gaze toward the base of the old sycamore tree, its roots gnarled like veins gripping the earth. There, half hidden in shadow and wrapped in what looked like an old wool blanket, was a wicker basket. It didn't belong. Nothing about it made sense, not the way it sat perfectly placed but forgotten, not the faint sound like a sigh or a whimper coming from inside. Sadie took a step forward. Caleb reached out instinctively to stop her, but she was already moving. As she knelt down and peeled back the blanket, what she saw made her breath hitch. A baby girl no more than a few weeks old stared up at her with wide, unblinking eyes. The baby was impossibly still, her cheeks flushed from the morning chill, her small fists balled near her chest, as if guarding herself from a world she hadn't yet begun to understand. Sadie knelt in the wet grass, heart pounding, and slowly reached for the blanket, her fingers trembling as they peeled it back to reveal more of the infant's tiny form. She couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, wrapped in a faded pink onesie. Her lips parted in a soft, rhythmic breath that signaled she was alive, but only just. Caleb crouched beside his sister, eyes scanning the area in disbelief, his mind already racing through possibilities. Was this some cruel prank? A desperate act? An accident? But then Sadie noticed something that sent a jolt through both of them. On the baby's left wrist, loosely looped over the soft skin, was a hospital ID bracelet, cheap plastic, slightly scuffed and stained with dirt. Printed in faded black ink were the words, Lily Grace. No last name, no birth date. Just a name, delicate, purposeful, haunting. Sadie whispered it aloud, her voice catching on the syllables as if saying it made the moment real. Lily Grace. The name settled over them like fog. Caleb looked around again, eyes narrowing at the empty woods. No tire tracks, no footsteps, no note. Whoever had left her had wanted her to be found, but not too quickly. She'd been left in a place sacred to the twins, a place hidden from the rest of town. That wasn't random. It was intentional. And the longer they stared at the infant's fragile frame and that single name etched in plastic, the more they both felt it deep in their bones. This wasn't just a baby. This was a message. Sadie stood up abruptly, reaching into her jacket pocket for her phone. Her eyes locked on the baby as if afraid she might vanish if she looked away for even a second. "We have to call someone," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The police, Child Protective Services. Someone needs to take her somewhere safe." But Caleb didn't move. He stayed crouched beside the basket, his jaw-clenched eyes focused on Lily Grace's bracelet, like it held answers he couldn't yet understand. And then what he said quietly. Sadie blinked, not expecting resistance. Then she gets help. Then she goes to a hospital, maybe a foster home. Caleb looked up at her, and the raw concern in his voice stopped her cold. "Sadie, you know what happens to babies like this. They get processed, passed around. You think someone's going to show up in Maple Hollow tomorrow to adopt her and give her the life she deserves?" His words hung in the morning air, too heavy for either of them to ignore. Sadie opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again. Caleb wasn't wrong. Their own lives had been shaped by the trauma of the system, losing their parents, being bounced between relatives before Aunt Eleanor finally took them in. The thought of Lily being dropped into that same uncertain maze made Sadie's stomach twist. "So what do we do?" she whispered, eyes wide, torn between fear and defiance. Caleb looked down at the baby, then back up at his sister. "We take her home. Just for now. Just until we figure out who she is." Sadie didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression shifted from panic to resolve, and without another word she reached down and lifted Lily Grace into her arms. The decision was made, not with loud declarations or shaking hands, but with a single shared look between Caleb and Sadie, one that had been forged through a lifetime of unspoken understanding. As the first light of morning broke fully across Elkhorn Lake, they moved quickly and quietly, with Lily Grace wrapped snugly in the wool blanket, her soft breaths barely audible against Sadie's chest. They didn't take the main trail back home, instead, veering left into the woods, where a hidden footpath led to the old storage shed behind Aunt Eleanor's property, a weathered wooden structure that once held tools and hay bales, now little more than a dusty ghost of their childhood adventures. The door creaked in protest as Caleb pushed it open, and beams of sunlight filtered through the gaps in the slats, casting long golden streaks across the floor. Sadie stepped inside first, gently placing Lily in a wicker basket lined with clean rags they found under an old tarp. Caleb quickly dragged over a space heater they used for winter repairs, checking the plug and brushing off cobwebs, while Sadie adjusted the blanket, whispering to the baby in a tone neither of them had ever heard her use before, soft, protective, terrified. They both knew this wasn't a long-term solution. They both knew they were stepping into dangerous territory. But for now, secrecy felt safer than exposure. They agreed to keep Lily hidden, even from Aunt Eleanor. They'd take turns checking on her, bringing food and blankets, watching over her like sentinels at a fragile, invisible gate. Outside, the world carried on Maple Hollow, preparing for another ordinary school day. But inside that tiny shed, everything had already changed. And the truth was, neither of them would ever be the same again. It was early evening when Sadie crept back to the old shed with a small bottle of warmed milk tucked under her jacket and a flashlight held between her teeth. The light outside was fading fast, and the quiet hum of cicadas had begun to rise around the property like a chorus of secrets. Inside the shed, the air was warm from the space heater Caleb had left running on low, and Lily Grace was nestled in a bed of blankets, her tiny body rising and falling in soft, peaceful rhythm. Sadie knelt beside her bottle in hand and carefully lifted the baby into her arms. As Lily drank, her small fingers curled around Sadie's thumb, and for a moment everything felt impossibly still, just a girl and a child hidden away from the world. But then, as Sadie adjusted Lily's position and gently shifted the neckline of her onesie to burp her, her fingers brushed across something that made her pause. Just below the nape of the baby's neck, slightly to the right of her spine, was a thin raised scar no longer than an inch. It was faint pale against her delicate skin, but unmistakable, a clean surgical line that didn't belong on a newborn. Sadie's heart kicked in her chest as she examined it more closely, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't a scratch or a birthmark. It looked deliberate, as if something had been done to Lily, something hidden. She reached for her phone, took a quick photo, then stared at the image in disbelief. Why would a baby this young have a scar like that? What kind of hospital procedure left no record, no parents, no name, but Lily Grace Sadie felt a cold shiver run through her. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about abandonment anymore. It was something else, something darker. Later that night, as rain began to tap gently against the windows of their upstairs bedroom, Caleb sat hunched over his laptop, eyes darting between search results, while Sadie paced behind him, arms crossed tightly across her chest. They hadn't spoken much since she'd shown him the photo of the scar, but the weight of it hung between them like smoke. Earlier, when they'd gone back to check on Lily together, Caleb had noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small weathered sticker pressed flat against the underside of the basket, half covered in dirt. He'd peeled it off carefully and tucked it in his pocket. Now it lay on the desk in front of them, illuminated by the soft blue glow of the screen, a faded white medical barcode with a string of letters and numbers below it, RX 9471FCMH. It didn't match any hospital ID formats they were familiar with. At first they assumed it might be a tracking number or maybe an old supply tag. But a quick internet search for the code brought up nothing useful until Caleb added medical research to the query. That's when things changed. A forum post buried deep on a data leak site popped up, redacted documents from a now-defunct pharmaceutical lab out of Maryland known as Fortis Core Medical Holdings. The letters FCMH matched the final part of the code, and the document mentioned unauthorized neonatal genome sampling. Caleb's hands froze on the keyboard. Sadie leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. Genome sampling on infants, she whispered. The rain picked up outside, and the entire room seemed to tighten with tension. The sticker wasn't random. The scar wasn't an accident. And Lily Grace hadn't just been abandoned. She'd been part of something. Something secret. Something dangerous. That night, the idea of Lily being just another abandoned baby quietly unraveled in their minds. The scar, the strange barcode, the leaked mention of unauthorized genome sampling, it all pointed to something far more calculated than a desperate mother leaving her child by a lakeside. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the dim glow of the laptop as if searching it for something solid to hold on to. Sadie sat beside him now, no longer pacing, just still processing. "This wasn't random," she said finally, her voice low, almost afraid to speak the truth aloud. "Whoever left her didn't just pick a quiet spot. They chose that tree, that basket, that bracelet. Someone wanted her found, but not by just anyone, by us." The weight of those words settled over them, bringing a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Lily had been placed, not discarded. Watched maybe, protected, or maybe studied. and the deeper they thought about it, the more disturbing it became. Why were there no missing child reports in the county matching Lily's description? No hospital birth records for a baby with that name. No local chatter about a runaway teen or young mother in crisis. Nothing. As if Lily didn't exist. Caleb closed the laptop slowly, his jaw tightening. "We need to be careful," he murmured. "If someone went to this much trouble to make her disappear, they might come looking when they realize she didn't." Sadie met his gaze, a flicker of fear in her eyes. They had stumbled into something big, something far more dangerous than they were ready for. And deep down, they both knew this was only the beginning. The next afternoon, while Sadie stayed with Lily in the shed, Caleb climbed up to the attic above Aunt Eleanor's garage, a place thick with dust and forgotten years. The single bulb overhead flickered as he pulled down old cardboard boxes, most labeled with faded Sharpie ink Christmas Eleanor's college kitchen junk. But he was looking for something specific, something heavier than decorations or casserole pans. After nearly an hour, he found it, a rusted metal trunk with their father's initials etched into the corner, M.J. Michael Johnson. The lock had long since broken and the lid creaked as he lifted it open, revealing layers of photographs, letters, and worn notebooks with water-stained pages. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, just a sense that the answers weren't new, they were buried in the past. As he sifted through the papers, a folded manila envelope slid free, yellowed and sealed with brittle tape. Written across the front were the words, "West Grove Children's Center. Intake records." Caleb's breath caught. He sat back on his heels, slowly peeling open the envelope to reveal 2 intake forms, one for Michael Johnson, age 7, and another for Evelyn Moore, age 5. Their parents. Both admitted to West Grove in the fall of 1983, both transferred after 2 years to private care homes with redacted names. There was a scanned photo of the old brick building, too ominous, with barred windows, and a sign barely hanging from rusted chains. Caleb turned the page and spotted a typed memo clipped to the back, dated 1985. Subject: candidates eligible for genomic screening, flagged for compliance. His heart pounded. West Grove wasn't just an orphanage. It had been a testing ground. And maybe Lily wasn't the first child to be caught in something that should have never existed. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet and the only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the old siding, Sadie tiptoed into the master bedroom they never used. It had remained untouched since their mother died, the bed still made with the same quilt, the scent of lavender faint in the air, like memory frozen in fabric. She opened the tall wooden wardrobe that stood against the far wall, something their mother had always kept locked but never explained why. The key, long forgotten in a jewelry box, still fit the rusted lock. As the door creaked open, the smell of cedar wafted out, and with it, a wave of melancholy. Inside were neat stacks of folded clothes, 2 wool coats, and a small metal box tucked behind an old purse. Sadie pulled it out gently, placed it on the bed, and opened the latch. Inside were photographs, letters, and a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the letter R. She picked up the top photo and felt her stomach twist. It showed a young woman no older than 20, with soft curls and tired eyes, cradling a newborn wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The woman's expression was both tender and haunted, as if joy and fear coexisted in that single frame. Scrawled on the back in faded pen were the words, "Rachel, 2007. Sadie stared at it, heart thudding. She didn't know a Rachel. Their mother had never spoken of one. But the way the woman held the baby, it wasn't distant. It was personal, maternal, and the baby. The shape of her face, the soft curls, the slightly upturned nose, it looked so much like Lily. Too much. Sadie felt the edges of her world begin to tilt. Who was Rachel? Was she Lily's mother? And if so, why was her picture hidden here, buried behind layers of silence in a wardrobe no one was supposed to open? Something had been kept from them, something their mother had known and maybe feared. The answers weren't just in medical records or secret codes, they were in blood, in family. Sadie sat on the edge of the bed, the photograph trembling in her hand as she studied every inch of the woman's face. There was something achingly familiar in the curve of Rachel's jaw, the shape of her eyes, and especially the way her brow creased ever so slightly when looking down at the baby in her arms, an expression she had seen mirrored in Lily just that morning, when the infant furrowed her tiny brow while trying to focus on the ceiling fan spinning above her. At first it felt like coincidence, the kind that clings to tired minds desperate for answers. But the more Sadie stared, the more undeniable it became. The baby in the photo had Lily's ears, her button nose, and even the same faint birthmark near her left temple. Sadie's heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but a sudden, overwhelming rush of possibility. What if this wasn't just an old photo tucked away for sentiment? What if this was Lily's origin? What if this Rachel was her mother, and their mother had known? She turned the photo over again, tracing the letters slowly. Rachel. 2007. That would make the baby in the photo 18 now, except Lily was only a few months old. A different baby. Or was the photo mislabeled? Was the Rachel in the picture their mother under a different name? The questions spiraled, tangled with the weight of things that had never been spoken in their household. Their mom had always been kind but secretive. There were no family albums, no stories about her own childhood, just vague references to hard times, and a preference for keeping the past locked behind polite smiles. Now Sadie wondered if their mother had been protecting someone or hiding something. She took out the bracelet from the box, the one with the engraved R, and slipped it into her pocket. Caleb had to see this. If Rachel was Lily's mother, then they weren't just holding a stranger's child, they were connected to her. And if that connection was real, it meant Lily hadn't just stumbled into their lives by accident. She had been sent, or returned, and someone out there might be watching. The next morning, as the fog still hung low over Maple Hollow, and the streets remained hushed with early silence, Sadie burst into the shed behind the house, clutching the photograph and a small stack of old letters she'd found tucked beneath the box of keepsakes. Caleb, who had been rocking Lily in his arms with practiced gentleness, looked up with a mixture of worry and anticipation. Without a word, Sadie handed him the photo of Rachel, and then fanned out the letters, each addressed in the same delicate handwriting, each stamped from a town 2 hours east Brookline, Kentucky. The return address was scrawled in fading ink, Rachel M. 172 Hollow Creek Lane. Some of the envelopes were unopened, dated as far back as 2005, long before either of them had been old enough to read a postmark. Their mother had kept them, but never mentioned them, never let on that someone named Rachel had once tried to reach her. Caleb read one aloud, his voice tight with disbelief. It was a simple letter. No threats, no demands, just Rachel reaching out asking how their mother was doing, saying she missed her, that she was trying to get back on her feet and hoped to reconnect. There was no mention of a baby, no direct clues, but the emotion was palpable, raw, and real. The words pulsed with the kind of pain that doesn't lie. She knew her, Caleb said quietly. Our mom knew Rachel. She meant something to her. Sadie nodded, her eyes locked on the return address. And if Rachel was trying to come back, maybe she never got the chance. The siblings looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. They couldn't ignore this, not when a child's life, and maybe their own past, was tangled in whatever had been buried. With Lily bundled up and tucked into a makeshift carrier, they packed water bottles, snacks, and the letters into Sadie's backpack. Skipping school was the least of their concerns. They had a name, a photo, and an address. It wasn't much, but it was more than enough to begin. And so they set out, hearts pounding with uncertainty and hope, toward Brookline and the mystery that waited at 172 Hollow Creek Lane. Louisville was bigger than either Caleb or Sadie remembered, louder and more restless than Maple Hollow, with its slow mornings and sleepy charm. They navigated the city streets with a wrinkled map and a nervous sense of purpose, finally arriving at a weathered brownstone on the edge of Old Walnut Street. Deborah Lynn lived on the third floor, a retired librarian who now volunteered at a local community center. They had called ahead using the number scribbled on the back of one of Rachel's old letters, and Deborah had agreed to meet them after lunch. As they climbed the narrow staircase, Sadie's fingers tightened around the envelope that held Rachel's photo and the oldest letter. When Deborah opened the door, she was smaller than they expected, her hair white and coiled neatly at the base of her neck, her eyes sharp and deeply observant behind thin glasses. She invited them in without hesitation, as if she had been expecting them all her life. Her apartment smelled of old books and rose soap. Caleb explained who they were, how they had found Rachel's name, and how their mother, Evelyn Moore, had once lived at West Grove Children's Center. At the mention of that name, Deborah's expression changed, a flicker of something painful passing behind her eyes. She nodded slowly, guiding them to a small couch as she lowered herself into an armchair. "Your mother," she said softly, "was my sister in everything but blood. We survived that place together." She went on to describe West Grove not just as an orphanage, but a controlled, cold institution where some children disappeared without explanation, and where the few who stayed too long carried secrets even into adulthood. She remembered Rachel, too quiet, sweet, but strange things happened around her, like sudden visits from men in black coats or medical tests with no explanation. Then one day, Rachel vanished. No goodbye, no records, just gone. Deborah had written to Evelyn over the years, trying to piece together what had happened. When Sadie showed her the photo of Rachel with the baby, Deborah stared for a long time, tears welling in her eyes. "That baby," she whispered, "she has Rachel's mouth. If she's back, someone's going to want her." The room fell silent as reality pressed in. This wasn't just a family mystery, it was something darker, deeper, and it wasn't over yet. Deborah's eyes darkened as she leaned back in her creaking kitchen chair, her hands trembling slightly as they folded over one another. The afternoon sun filtered through faded yellow curtains, casting soft stripes across the wooden table where Caleb and Sadie sat, Lily cradled quietly against Sadie's chest. "Rachel wasn't like the rest of us." Deborah began, her voice low and tinged with something that sounded like both reverence and fear. She asked questions, dangerous ones. At West Grove, they ran things strange. Kids disappeared. We were told they'd been adopted, but Rachel kept a notebook, kept names and dates. She noticed patterns: babies with rare blood types, kids who were always sick, but never got taken to a real doctor. And then there were the blood tests, weekly, sometimes more. They called it standard procedure, but Rachel found out it wasn't. Deborah's fingers tapped the edge of her mug, her jaw tightening. She overheard one of the staff talking in the laundry room, saying something about a contract and viable donors. That's when she started sneaking into the file room at night. Said she saw medical records being altered, whole folders disappearing. She tried to tell a social worker once, but the next day that woman was reassigned out of state. Sadie exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Caleb, heart pounding. "Then what happened?" Caleb asked. Deborah looked at them both, her expression haunted. "Rachel went missing. They said she ran off, couldn't handle the stress. But I knew better. The night she vanished, she came to my room crying, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. 'They're going to take her,' she whispered. 'She's not safe here.' The next morning, both were gone. We never saw her again. A month later, a fire destroyed part of the records wing. Nobody asked questions. She looked down at Lily, asleep now, thumb in her mouth. If that baby was Rachel's, and you found her, then someone still doesn't want the truth out." The silence that followed was thick with realization. This wasn't just a story about a missing girl. It was about something much bigger, something hidden in plain sight, and still dangerous to this day. They left the cafe just after 3, the late autumn sun beginning to dip below the rooftops of Louisville, casting long shadows across the pavement. Deborah had insisted on walking back to her apartment just 3 blocks away, saying the air helped clear her thoughts. Caleb and Sadie had planned to follow her later, maybe press for more answers once she had time to gather her memory. But something felt off. As Deborah walked ahead, her coat drawn tight and purse slung over one shoulder, Sadie noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Its engine was idling, the windows tinted too dark to see inside. Caleb caught her glance and followed it. The car hadn't been there earlier. They exchanged a silent look but said nothing. 5 minutes later, the quiet afternoon shattered. The sound of screeching tires tore through the air, followed by a heavy metallic thud and the shatter of glass. Sadie and Caleb ran. Deborah lay crumpled against the sidewalk, her purse flung into the street, one shoe missing, her body twisted unnaturally. The black sedan was gone, speeding around the corner before anyone could read the plates. People screamed, a waiter from a nearby diner called 911, and someone rushed forward to check Deborah's pulse, but Caleb didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the blood pooling beneath her head, his breath stuck in his throat. Sadie grabbed his arm and pulled him back as sirens began to wail in the distance. "This wasn't an accident," she whispered fiercely, her voice shaking. They were watching her. They knew she talked to us. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Deborah never regained consciousness. As she was loaded into the ambulance, Caleb spotted something on the ground, her notebook partly torn but still intact. He scooped it up, heart-pounding, and tucked it under his jacket. Whatever she hadn't said yet might be in there. As the flashing lights faded down the road, they stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing on them like a storm cloud. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. Someone was trying to erase the truth, and now they were next. It started with a shadow outside the classroom window. Caleb was halfway through a pop quiz in Mr. Donnelly's history class when he noticed the tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit standing just beyond the glass arms, crossed eyes sweeping across the school courtyard with an unsettling stillness. At first, Caleb tried to shake it off, maybe a parent, maybe a delivery guy, but something about the man's posture and the way his gaze locked onto the building made his stomach twist. 15 minutes later, a knock came at the classroom door. The assistant principal stepped in, leaned over Mr. Donnelly's desk, whispered something, and then turned toward Caleb with a smile too tight to be natural. "Caleb Johnson. Someone from law enforcement needs to speak with you. Just a few questions, nothing to worry about." The room fell silent as every head turned. Caleb felt his blood run cold as he followed them down the hall to the administrative office where the man from the window was waiting. He had a laminated badge clipped to his blazer, which he flashed quickly, too quickly, for Caleb to read. "Agent Dawson," he said in a clipped voice. "Federal Protective Services. Just a routine inquiry. Mind if we talk?" He ushered Caleb into the empty counselor's office, closed the door, and offered a seat with a cold smile. "You and your sister Sadie, right? You've been seen with a baby. A girl. Not from around here. Know anything about that?" Caleb's mouth went dry. He tried to play dumb, but the man leaned forward, voice dropping. "Listen, son. We're tracking an endangered child. This isn't about getting you in trouble, it's about making sure everyone's safe. Babies need protection. You wouldn't want to be responsible for a child getting hurt, would you?" His tone was calm, but something beneath it buzzed with threat. Caleb nodded slowly, saying nothing. When the man left, Caleb waited until the door clicked shut before bolting down the hall to find Sadie. They weren't just being watched now. They were being hunted. Sadie stood just outside the front office, pretending to skim the school bulletin board, her ears straining for any fragments of conversation from behind the closed counselor's door. She had followed Caleb out of instinct the moment she saw him being led away, her twin radar on high alert. As she shifted her weight from foot to foot, the door opened unexpectedly, and the tall man in the charcoal suit stepped out. He didn't notice her at first. His gaze swept down the hallway, expression unreadable, before he paused at the front desk. Sadie's eyes flicked downward. There, clipped just above his breast pocket, was a hard plastic ID badge. She squinted, pretending to yawn and stretch as she angled her head. It read, "Travis Dean, CDC Special Unit." Her heart skipped. CDC, as in Centers for Disease Control. Why would someone from the CDC be asking about a baby? And what kind of special unit would track two teenagers over a foundling infant? She watched as he pulled a slim black phone from his coat and typed something quickly. Voice low but firm. Nothing definitive yet. The boy's stonewalling. But if they still have the child, we'll find her. That last word her sliced through Sadie like a wire pulled taut. Lily. He meant Lily. She ducked behind a trophy case as he turned and headed out through the main entrance, walking briskly with the precision of someone used to being followed or feared. The moment he was gone, Sadie ran straight to the science wing and yanked Caleb out of class mid-period. In the hallway, her words tumbled out in a rush. "His name's Travis Dean. He's not FBI, he's with the CDC, the special unit. I saw his badge." Caleb's eyes widened, and in that instant they both knew this wasn't just about guardianship or child services. This had to do with something deeper, something scientific, something dangerous. The scar behind Lily's ear, the barcode on the basket, the missing mother. It was all connected. And now a government agency was on their trail using a name that sounded official but felt like a threat. Whatever the CDC special unit was, it wasn't there to protect Lily. It was there to take her. That night, under the dim yellow porch light that flickered like it was gasping for breath, Caleb and Sadie moved in silence, their faces pale and drawn eyes flicking toward every rustling branch and passing car. The conversation was long over. They didn't need to debate anymore. After what Sadie had seen at school, after the man's voice saying, "We'll find her," there was no longer a choice. There was only one option: run. Lily was bundled in the same old blanket they'd found her in now, wrapped tighter and warmer, her tiny breaths puffing like clouds against Caleb's chest. Sadie packed fast and methodically, throwing essentials into an old camping backpack: diapers, baby wipes, a few bottles, formula cans, 2 flashlights, a half-used first aid kit, and the crumbling leather-bound notebook of their mother's she'd always kept under her bed. But the most important item, nearly forgotten until the last moment, was the dusty metal box hidden in the floorboard beneath their dad's old workbench. Inside it, wrapped in a towel, was a clunky external hard drive, probably 10 years old, with a faded label in Sharpie WG, 13, Rachel. Caleb didn't know what it meant, but something told him it mattered. It had to. As Sadie zipped the bag shut, they heard a low rumble on the gravel driveway, the kind of car that didn't belong in a town like Maple Hollow. Without looking, Caleb whispered, "We go now." Out the back, across the yard, through the barn gate, and into the cornfield beyond. Their breath fogged in the early autumn chill as the distant engine cut off. Caleb led baby pressed close to his chest, while Sadie followed with the backpack bouncing against her spine, heart pounding. There was no destination yet, just a single urgent mission: don't let Lily fall into the wrong hands. Because whoever Travis Dean really was, whatever the CDC special unit stood for, Lily was more than a baby to them. She was a target, and somewhere inside that hard drive might be the reason why. Under the faint light of a motel lamp in a forgotten corner of eastern Kentucky, with the curtains drawn tight and the world outside hushed in rain, Sadie sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she plugged the old external hard drive into Caleb's aging laptop. The screen flickered for a moment, then sprang to life. Dozens of folders scrolled down in faded file names, most unreadable, some labeled in codes they didn't recognize. But one folder caught her breath. For Sadie and Caleb, if it's too late. Her hand hovered over the mouse for just a second before she clicked it open. A single video file blinked on screen. Mom, Final Suo 7, move. She double-clicked. The screen went black for a moment, then lit up with the face of their mother, pale, drawn eyes swollen like she hadn't slept in days. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but clear, the kind that wrapped around your ribs like a whisper and shattered your chest. "If you're watching this, it means we didn't make it," she began, her voice barely holding back a tremor. "I wanted to tell you so many things in person, but if we're gone, if Rachel and I, if we didn't survive, then you need to know what we died trying to protect." Sadie stared, unblinking, a sob catching in her throat. Caleb stood frozen by the door. Lily asleep on his chest, both of them paralyzed by the image of the woman who'd raised them, and who had clearly lived a life they never fully understood. Back in 2005, their mother continued, glancing down nervously like someone might burst through the door. Even now, there was a project called Gen Cure. It was hidden behind West Grove Children's Home, but it wasn't about charity. It was a front for blood trials on infants with rare antigens. Rachel and I, we found the files. We were just teens, but we knew it wasn't right. Children were getting sick. Some disappeared. And then Rachel got pregnant. She looked up, eyes blazing, now her voice rising. They wanted her baby, not for adoption, for harvesting. That baby was born with something they called Serum L, a blood property that could fight viral collapse. They called her an asset. Rachel ran. I helped her disappear. I've kept the drive. I've kept the proof. I've kept the truth buried until now. But if you're seeing this, they've found her. They've found Lily. Sadie's breath caught. She looked at Caleb, whose arms tightened instinctively around the sleeping child. "Protect her!" Their mother whispered, on-screen eyes filled with fierce urgency. "She's not a mistake. She's a miracle. And if they get her back, they'll destroy her." The screen went black. A long silence filled the room, heavy as lead. The only sound was the low hum of the rain against the motel roof. Caleb sat down beside Sadie, still clutching Lily. "We can't run anymore," she whispered. "We have to expose this." Caleb nodded, once jaw clenched. Their mother had kept them safe with silence. Now it was their turn to speak. It started to come together like shattered glass rearranging into a window. As Caleb and Sadie scrolled through the rest of the files on the old hard drive, more fragments of the past spilled out, scanned documents with hospital letterheads, confidential reports marked "Property of CDC Special Unit" and photographs too disturbing to ignore, rows of cribs in dimly lit rooms, IVs in the arms of infants, clipboards tracking blood work, and codes scrawled beside names that had no surnames, only designations. One file, buried 3 folders deep, contained a presentation slide titled "G Viral Resistance Correlation Infant Candidates." Sadie clicked on it, heart pounding. The text was dense, filled with medical jargon, but the meaning was clear enough. These children had something in their blood, something rare, something powerful, and someone wanted to replicate it. Their parents, Daniel and Laura Johnson, had once lived quiet lives, or so the twins had believed. In Maple Hollow, they were the warm couple who ran the town's only bookshop, who brought soup to neighbors and smiled through storms. But in the files, they were subjects Alpha 12 and Alpha 13, former residents of the West Grove Children's Home, who as teenagers had uncovered a secret blood testing initiative funded by a shadow arm of the government, cloaked in medical grants and disguised as humanitarian outreach. Their mother and Rachel had found the documentation after a baby named Jasper, healthy the night before, died after a test injection. When they raised questions, they were silenced, threatened with expulsion or worse. Instead, they copied the files, sent anonymous tips to 2 journalists, and vanished into foster families. Years later, when Laura reconnected with Rachel, it was because Rachel's newborn Lily had tested positive for what the documents called genetic anomaly L. That anomaly apparently was tied to a blood resistance gene that, if isolated, could change immunology forever. The problem was to harvest it required ongoing samples from a growing living child. The babies weren't being adopted. They were being kept in controlled placements, tracked under false identities, visited by supposed doctors, and bled dry over years. And when Rachel refused to comply, she fled. Laura helped her. They built a cover, moved through safe houses, and eventually settled in Maple Hollow under new identities, hiding Lily's birth and even keeping the truth from Caleb and Sadie to protect them. But someone found them. Someone silenced Rachel. And then slowly the same shadow began closing in on Laura. A forged diagnosis, a car accident that wasn't an accident, and sealed death reports that Sadie now realized had never quite made sense. Laura must have known it was only a matter of time. The video wasn't just a farewell, it was a warning. And the hard drive wasn't a relic of grief, but a loaded weapon filled with truth that could bring down something monstrous. Sadie looked at Caleb. They weren't just victims, she whispered. They were whistleblowers, and someone made sure no one ever heard them. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving the screen. Then it's time they finally do. Caleb knew it wasn't just about hiding anymore, it was about finding the truth before the truth was buried for good. After everything they had uncovered in the hard drive, videos, documents, blood code records, one name kept resurfacing: Westridge Memorial Hospital. It appeared in internal memos labeled as Field Facility 03 and was tied to several coded transfers of infant subjects marked G class or L series. One photo had caught his attention, a blurred image of a medical lab with a faded Westridge logo on the wall, barely visible through the glass. That's when Caleb made the decision. They couldn't wait. They couldn't keep running forever. Someone had to go inside. He didn't tell Sadie the full plan at first, just said he needed to check something. But she knew him well enough to sense what he was about to do and tried to stop him. "If they find you," she started, but Caleb shook his head, eyes steady. "Then at least we'll know what we're really dealing with." Dressed in borrowed scrubs from a friend who worked night shift at a nearby clinic, Caleb made his way toward the outskirts of Louisville, where the towering gray structure of Westridge loomed like a fortress. The hospital operated like any other on the surface birth surgery's smiling nurses, but the East Wing had restricted access and was marked Research Division, authorized personnel only. Using a stolen visitor badge and a forged maintenance pass, he and Sadie printed from an old design template in the files. Caleb slipped through the service corridor just before midnight. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of machines. He followed signs not listed on public directories: Sub-Level B Cryo Storage Genetic Monitoring Unit. With every hallway, the place grew colder, quieter, more sterile. And then, tucked behind a keypad-locked door, he saw rows of infant incubators in dim light hooked to machines. Files beside them marked with codes, not names, bloodline profiles. One of them read, Lily G, subject 07 recovered. Caleb's breath caught. She had been here, and they were still tracking her. The morning after Caleb's late-night infiltration, he and Sadie sat in the dim back room of a roadside diner, poring over everything he had seen. The images haunted him: rows of silent cribs, the code-labeled infants, the chilling words, subject 07 recovered. They needed more. A single glimpse wasn't enough to expose anything, not to the world, and not to those still watching. That's when Sadie suggested it. He suggested, "They probably have weekly deliveries, right? What if we become one?" At first, it seemed impossible, but then they tracked down a regional courier company contracted for medical supply deliveries to Westridge Meditrans Logistics. The next 48 hours became a blur of strategy. They obtained a worn-out Meditrans uniform from a thrift store and modified a real delivery manifest with enough accuracy to slip past a basic check. Using a borrowed cargo van from a local garage where Caleb once worked summers, they planned the entry point East Wing loading dock just past noon, when shift rotations made supervision sloppier. Sadie had hacked into the hospital's scheduling app through a backdoor in an older version of its code found on the hard drive. She had studied every name, every timestamp. "There's a 5-minute gap at 12:32 when the intake scanner resets," she whispered as they drove toward the towering gray complex. They parked behind a line of real trucks, hearts pounding. With clipboards in hand and IDs made from laminated paper and bold confidence, they approached the dock guard. "Medical oxygen tanks for cryo," Caleb said flatly. The guard barely glanced up, checked the clipboard, and waved them through. The elevator creaked as they descended into the sublevels. Caleb's hands were trembling, but Sadie kept her voice even, repeating the plan. As they turned the corner into the storage wing, a voice crackled behind them over the intercom. "Delivery Team 6, confirm contents and ID." Caleb reached for the comm. "Oxygen tanks batch 0489, clearance code Alpha 47. Silence. Then a beep. The door slid open. They were in. Down the sterile corridor lined with flickering fluorescent lights, Caleb and Sadie moved like shadows, hearts racing beneath their borrowed uniforms as they passed room after room of locked, silent doors. Each bore a numbered panel and biometric scanner, but one in particular made them stop. Room B112. The manifest Sadie had found in the old hard drive had mentioned this number twice, once in a mislabeled blood inventory chart, and once next to a name R. Sullivan. Rachel. Caleb pressed his ear to the metal frame and heard something faint, breathing, uneven, and human. Sadie reached into her satchel, pulling out the makeshift ID keycard she had coded from a broken RFID chip, and carefully slid it across the panel. A blinking red light, then green. With a soft hiss, the door cracked open. What they saw inside stole the breath from their lungs. In the center of the room, strapped to a gurney and monitored by machines emitting steady clinical beeps, was a woman, pale, bruised, and thin, but unmistakably alive. Her dark curls matted against her cheek, an old IV line trailing from her arm, and around her neck, tucked into a hospital gown, was a locket. Sadie stepped forward, her eyes welling. Inside the locket was a picture, a newborn baby with the same doe-like eyes as Lily Grace. "It's her," she whispered. "It's really her." Rachel Sullivan had not died. She had been hidden, locked away like a secret too dangerous to release. As Caleb scanned the monitors and Sadie gently touched the woman's hand, Rachel stirred slightly, her lips dry, whispering something unintelligible. "She's sedated," Sadie said, scanning a chart beside the bed. "They're keeping her just awake enough to not die." Caleb's fists clenched. This wasn't just a cover-up anymore. This was a prison. And Rachel Sullivan, Lily's mother, was the prisoner. Rachel's eyes fluttered open, glazed with the remnants of sedatives. But as she saw Sadie and Caleb beside her, something shifted, a flicker of clarity, of recognition, of maternal desperation, fighting through the fog. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, and Sadie leaned close, brushing a damp strand of hair from Rachel's face. "Where's Lily, Rachel?" whispered her voice, hoarse and cracked from disuse. "She's safe," Sadie replied gently. "With us." Rachel's breath hitched, her hands trembling as they clutched at the sheets. "You have to keep her hidden. They're not after me. They're after her." Caleb exchanged a glance with his sister, confusion written all over his face. "Why? Why?" Her Rachel closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Because Lily was born with Rh null blood." She paused, struggling for strength. "The golden blood. No antigens. It can be given to anyone, but received by almost no one. There are only a handful of people in the entire world with it. Fewer than 10 that the world knows of. And she's the youngest recorded case. She was supposed to be a miracle. But to them, she became a resource." Her voice shook with the weight of that word. She wasn't a baby to them. She was a specimen. A living vault of something priceless. They kept me sedated, isolated, lied to me for months. Said she died during delivery. But I knew better. I fought back, leaked what I could, and the moment I tried to escape with her, everything fell apart. I never made it out. They took her, and I've been here ever since. Caleb's mind reeled. Rh null. The blood type so rare it was practically legend, used in high-risk transfusions, experimental research, and as Rachel was now revealing, hoarded in the shadows by powerful interests. This wasn't just about a missing child. Lily wasn't just abandoned. She had been hunted. And if Rachel was right then, their discovery of her by the lake hadn't been fate. It had been someone's desperate last act to hide her from a world that would never stop chasing her. Rachel's voice, though still frail, took on a quiet urgency as she continued, her eyes flicking toward the sealed door, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "They call it the Helix Directive," she whispered. "It's not a government agency, at least not officially. It's a privately funded initiative with deep roots buried under layers of fake charities, research grants, and medical fronts. Their true purpose is genetic acquisition, specifically the harvesting and study of children born with ultra-rare blood types or gene mutations that offer heightened regenerative potential, immunological resistance, or unique biological compatibility for organ synthesis. Rh null blood is just one piece of their puzzle. They collect samples, run immunoresponse trials, and even perform forced compatibility testing to see if these children can serve as living donors or subjects for gene editing implants. The ones that survive are kept monitored like assets. The ones that don't..." She broke off, her voice catching. "They disappear from every database, every record, like they never existed at all." Sadie's hand flew to her mouth, her stomach lurching as she imagined Lily, that delicate child with wide, curious eyes, being strapped to a cold metal table. Caleb felt a chill coil down his spine. "Why children?" he asked, though he was already afraid of the answer. Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes heavy with grief. "Because children's immune systems are more malleable, more adaptable. Their bodies can be pushed further in clinical trials before they reject foreign materials. And because children don't fight back the same way adults do. They're easier to control, easier to erase." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air vents above. The Helix Directive wasn't just experimenting on rare children, it was turning them into currency, into test subjects for the elite and terminally ill who could afford unregulated treatments. It was science without soul, progress without ethics. And Lily had been born into their crosshairs simply by carrying a blood type too rare to be ignored. Rachel's voice trembled as she looked down at her hands stained by time and the weight of secrets too long buried. Deborah Lynn. She whispered the name like a prayer and a wound at once. She was more than just a friend. She was the only person who stood by me when everyone else said I was paranoid, delusional, or dangerous. When I realized what they were doing to the children, drawing blood without consent, running unauthorized trials, sterilizing records, she was the one who helped me steal the first set of documents from the West Grove orphanage. She snuck me into the basement archives late one night, used her old ID badge to bypass locked doors. She said, if the world ever learned the truth, it would burn every lie built on those children's backs. But I was already pregnant with Lily then, and once they found out, everything changed. They tried to lock me up under the pretense of mental instability. Deborah, she helped me disappear, drove me through back roads in the middle of the night, let me sleep in her trailer for weeks, lied to the police and to her own sister to keep me safe. But the night after she called a journalist, she thought she could trust her car was run off the road. It wasn't an accident. The brakes had been tampered with. She died instantly. No investigation, no trial. Just silence. And I knew then there was no one else I could trust. So I took Lily, changed names, vanished into the system. I thought maybe if I stayed invisible long enough, they'd forget. But the Helix Directive never forgets. Deborah gave her life to protect the truth, and they erased her like she never existed. But I remember. I remember every scar she carried, every warning she gave. And now it's happening again. They know Lily's alive, and they won't stop until she's theirs unless we finish what Deborah started. Caleb moved with a sharp, quiet urgency, the kind that came not from panic, but from clarity. He knew what had to be done, and failure wasn't an option. Rachel's hand trembled in his as he led her down the sterile corridor of Westridge Memorial's restricted wing. Every flicker of fluorescent light overhead casting shadows that made them flinch. Her hospital gown was torn, her wrists still red from the restraints they'd kept her in, but her eyes were alive, fierce with a mother's determination. Lily, she breathed. Where's Lily? Caleb didn't answer, didn't need to. He knew Sadie had gone the other way, slipping through the chaos unfolding in the emergency surgery wing, weaving past distracted nurses and panicked interns to reach the room where they'd taken Lily after a sudden spike in her vitals. Sadie had seen it on the monitor just moments before the numbers flashing red, and she knew that meant they were going to take her into an experimental procedure with or without consent. She sprinted through the maze of swinging doors and antiseptic corridors, her heart slamming against her ribs as she reached the operating prep room, just as a masked doctor hovered over Lily with a syringe. "Stop!" she shouted, startling the nurse beside him. "She's not yours." The doctor hesitated for a split second, and that was enough. Sadie lunged forward, cradling Lily's limp body to her chest, her voice breaking into a whisper of fierce promises. "I've got you. I'm here." Meanwhile, Caleb and Rachel made their way to the service stairs, the pounding of boots from above suggesting security had been alerted. But Caleb had memorized the schematics, had studied every inch of the hospital's fire exit plans. They slipped down into the basement, into the old laundry tunnels that hadn't been used in years, the scent of mildew and bleach guiding them out. By the time Sadie burst through the emergency exit, holding Lily tight, Caleb and Rachel were already there, waiting breathless and ready to run. They barely made it across the parking structure's shadowed edge when the harsh beam of a flashlight slashed through the dark, followed by the sharp command of a voice they instantly recognized, Travis Dean. "Stop right there!" His footsteps thundered across the pavement, gun-drawn badge flashing under the dim light as he closed in fast. Caleb instinctively pushed Sadie and Lily behind a parked ambulance, shielding them with his body, as Rachel froze for a moment, eyes wide with the sick recognition of the man who had once interrogated her inside a padded room and promised she'd never see her daughter again. Caleb stood, his ground hands slightly raised, trying to draw Dean's attention away from the girls. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said, his voice low, steady. "She's just a child." Dean didn't blink. "She's government property now," he snapped, lifting the pistol and taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "And you're about to disappear like your parents did." The words hit Caleb like a slap, but before he could react, Dean lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the metal door of a service van. Caleb gasped, vision flickering as Dean raised the gun to his temple, whispering something cold and rehearsed about loose ends. And then, in that terrifying stillness before death, Rachel moved. Without hesitation, she stepped into the open hands in the air, voice trembling but clear. "It's me you want, not him. I'm the one who took the data. I'm the one who exposed Project Morrow." Dean's grip faltered just for a second, but enough. Caleb elbowed him hard in the ribs, knocking the gun off balance, and the shot fired wide, shattering the van's window instead of Caleb's skull. Rachel bolted down the opposite aisle, luring Dean into the chase, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows, as Caleb grabbed Sadie and Lily and took the other direction. For now, Rachel had bought them time with her voice, her courage, and the last ounce of strength she had left. Breathless and bruised, Caleb clutched Lily tightly against his chest as Sadie dragged open the rusted metal hatch behind the morgue wing, revealing a narrow, dust-choked passage just wide enough for them to slip through. Rachel, her face streaked with sweat, and blood motioned them in with urgency, her voice a hoarse whisper. "It leads beneath the east wing. They used it during the old renovations. It's not on any modern map." Without hesitation, the four of them ducked into the darkness, sealing the hatch behind them, just as distant footsteps and the echo of angry shouts filled the corridor above. The tunnel was cold, damp, and lined with ancient bricks, stained by time and forgotten secrets. Their footsteps echoed strangely, swallowed by the low ceiling and claustrophobic walls. Pipes jutted out at odd angles. Old hospital gurneys and discarded equipment lay rotting in corners, relics of a time when this path had once been used to transport patients away from prying eyes. Sadie led with a flashlight pulled from her backpack, its weak beam flickering as they moved deeper into the subterranean maze. The air grew colder, heavier with each step, thick with mold, and something metallic, perhaps. Rust, perhaps blood. Caleb kept glancing back, his mind looping on the sound of Dean's voice, the heat of the gun barrel against his skin. He couldn't stop shaking. Ahead, Rachel suddenly stopped, pointing toward a faded emblem painted on a door, Westridge Medical Archives. "This used to connect to the old records wing," she said. "If the passage hasn't collapsed, it'll bring us out near the decommissioned staff housing." Behind them, a sudden thud on the hatch echoed like a gunshot. Someone had found the entrance. No more time. They pushed forward, ducking through twisted beams and low-hanging wires, crawling when the ceiling narrowed. At last, light, faint but real, filtered through a cracked grate ahead. Rachel reached up, shoved it open with trembling hands, and one by one they climbed into the forgotten boiler room of an abandoned wing, gasping for breath, heartbeats pounding in sync. They had made it barely, but the real escape had only just begun. The morning sun cast a grayish hue over the city skyline as the group emerged from a rusted fire exit tucked behind a forgotten warehouse, their breath still ragged from the harrowing escape beneath the hospital. With Lily wrapped in Sadie's jacket and Rachel's steps faltering from exhaustion, they moved quickly and quietly through back alleys, avoiding cameras and main roads. Caleb clutched the old USB drive like it was the last ember of truth in a world gone silent. Inside, it was everything his mother's testimony footage of children confined to glass rooms, documents stamped with federal seals and clinical trials no parent ever consented to. As they reached the quiet street in front of a nondescript brownstone building, tucked between a deli and an old tailor's shop, Rachel's voice broke the silence. "This is it. His name is Marcus Grant. My parents trusted him. If he's still alive, he's the only one who can get this out." They climbed the stairs, quickly buzzed the suite number, and after a tense pause, an elderly man with weary eyes and graying curls opened the door, surprise flashing across his face. "Rachel," he murmured before his gaze shifted to Lily and the others. "You're supposed to be dead," Rachel replied. "I need you to see something." Inside the dimly lit office, lined with old books and file cabinets, Caleb plugged the USB into an outdated desktop terminal while Marcus locked the door behind them. As the first file loaded a time-stamped video of a toddler strapped to a gurney as masked figures hovered, Marcus paled. He sank into his chair, hands trembling. "Dear God," he whispered. Sadie leaned against the wall, her arms around Lily, whose breathing had calmed slightly. Rachel stood silent, her eyes never leaving the screen. This was no longer about just escaping. This was about bringing to light what had been buried for too long. They had finally found someone who might help them make the world listen. Inside the dim office, with only the hum of the computer and the steady breathing of Lily to break the silence, Caleb watched as Marcus Grant inserted a second drive, copied the full contents of the USB, and began encrypting the files for secure transfer. The room was thick with tension, but it was purposeful, now controlled. A few minutes later, with a steady hand and tired eyes, Marcus uploaded the files to a series of trusted investigative networks, legal watchdog groups, and anonymous whistleblower forums. The moment the progress bar hit 100%, the world shifted. Within hours, the clip Rachel had once recorded, her tearful, urgent voice beside her husband's eyes. Red hands shaking began spreading across secure channels and encrypted feeds. "If you're watching this," Rachel said on screen, "it means we didn't make it. But our children are still out there. And so are yours. We discovered that children with rare blood types, specifically Rh-null, are being abducted or admitted into hospitals under false identities, used for clinical trials in gene therapy, transplant compatibility testing, and long-term immunological experiments. Most are never seen again." The video cut to lab footage covertly recorded by Caleb and Sadie's parents, masked researchers surrounding glass chambers, vials labeled with patient IDs and strange codes, one image of a small girl unconscious with medical tubes running from her arms. The clip ended with a list over 40 hospital names across 6 states, each tied to the same parent company, Westridge Biomedical Holdings. There were internal memos, emails between government officials, and falsified death certificates of children who were in reality relocated for further research. Almost instantly, social media exploded. Anonymous accounts began reposting the files. Journalists and watchdog agencies scrambled to verify the evidence. Within a day, Project Null trended globally. Caleb sat back in the worn leather chair, not smiling but breathing deeper than he had in weeks. The truth was out. His parents hadn't died in vain. As the storm of public outrage intensified and media scrutiny tightened its grip on every institution named in the leaked footage, federal investigations accelerated with rare urgency. Travis Dean, the man who had haunted Caleb and Sadie's every step, was apprehended just 2 days after the files went public, caught attempting to board a private charter flight under a false name, with forged credentials and a suitcase full of encrypted documents. His arrest marked a symbolic turning point. The agent who once claimed to uphold the law was now in handcuffs, escorted past reporters, shouting questions he refused to answer. But the damage had already been done. With his capture came a trove of internal files detailing the CDC special unit's off-the-books operations, implicating dozens of administrators, researchers, and hospital executives across multiple states. The system, now undeniably exposed, buckled under the weight of its crimes. Federal health agencies suspended all research linked to Rh-null genetic trials. Clinical trials involving children were halted nationwide. Hospitals flagged in the leaked documents faced immediate audits, and their directors were summoned to testify before congressional committees. Amid this reckoning, Rachel stood once again before a judge, not as a suspect or fugitive, but as a mother seeking the rightful return of her daughter. With Lily held close to her chest, she listened as the judge read the final ruling. Her eyes filled with tears as the words landed: full custody, restored immediate and permanent. There was no more room for doubt, no more forged paperwork, no shadowed agents to claim otherwise. Rachel was now legally and undeniably Lily's mother again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Rachel didn't stop. She didn't need headlines or applause. All she needed was Lily's hand in hers, and the knowledge that after years of silence, fear, and captivity, they were free. For the first time in years, she could breathe, and her daughter, once catalogued as a subject, was simply a little girl again. A mother and child no longer hidden, finally walking forward into the light. In the months following the trial and Travis Dean's arrest, Rachel channeled her pain, her fury, and her hard-won freedom into something no one had expected: a sanctuary. It began in silence, with late nights at the kitchen table sketching plans on napkins and notepads while Lily slept soundly for the first time in her life. With the help of pro bono attorneys, ethical scientists, and a wave of public supporters outraged by the exploitation of children with rare genes, Rachel founded the Haven Initiative, an independent nonprofit center designed to protect, shelter, and advocate for children born with rare genetic markers like Rh-null. The facility, located on the quiet outskirts of Louisville in a renovated hospital wing no longer in use, was outfitted with secure lodging, trauma-informed counselors, pediatric specialists, and legal teams trained to defend families against covert research interests. But Haven was more than a shelter. It was a declaration. Every child whose body had once been treated like a specimen was now given the dignity of a name, a history, and a future. Rachel worked tirelessly, meeting with lawmakers to push for national regulation on genetic testing of minors, establishing encrypted databases so families could safely register and find one another, and organizing outreach teams to track down children at risk of being pulled into the shadows. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she had once stood on the edge of that darkness herself, holding her baby with nowhere to run. The trauma did not disappear, but it found direction. And in every mother who walked through Haven's doors, trembling in every child whose blood had been taken without consent, Rachel saw reflections of herself and Lily. The center became a beacon, not just of safety, but of resistance, of remembrance, and of reclaimed power. For the first time, children with rare genes weren't hunted. They were protected. And it was Rachel, the woman they had tried to silence, who stood at the heart of it all, refusing to let it happen again. After everything they had been through, the coded letters, the buried memories, the hospital walls, and the narrow escapes, Caleb and Sadie found themselves drawn, not just by duty or shared trauma, but by something deeper: the quiet gravity of home. When Rachel invited them to stay, it wasn't a formal proposition, but a natural unfolding, as if fate had simply pulled their separate threads back into a single unbroken weave. They moved into the upstairs rooms of the modest house just behind the Haven Initiative, where morning sunlight spilled through the curtains and Lily's laughter filled the kitchen. The house once meant only for Rachel and her daughter now echoed with the warmth of an extended family, forged not by blood, but by truth, courage, and choice. Caleb, with his quiet steadiness, took to maintaining the tech systems that kept Haven secure, helping install encrypted software and surveillance tools that ensured no child could be taken again. Sadie, fiercely intuitive, began assisting Rachel in organizing patient files, writing public education materials, and coordinating outreach to rural clinics. On weekends, the three of them, sometimes with Lily nestled in Caleb's arms, would cook together, argue over which movie to watch, or sit on the porch sipping tea while memories surfaced like ghosts softened by time. There were moments of silence that said more than words, Rachel glancing at Caleb and seeing in him the strength she once feared her daughter would never be protected by, or Sadie watching Lily sleep and wondering how fate had led them, strangers once, into this makeshift family that now felt inevitable. It wasn't perfect. There were nightmares, flashbacks, mornings when no one spoke, but it was real and it was healing. They weren't trying to replace what they had lost. They were building something entirely new, something chosen. And perhaps that was the most radical kind of love there was. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, curled beside a picture book, and Rachel was finishing up her notes at the Haven Initiative, Sadie found herself alone in the attic again, the space that once held the fragments of their forgotten history. As dust danced in the amber light from the window, she opened the old wooden box one more time, the one they had nearly left behind in the rush to escape. Tucked beneath the yellowed letters and fading photographs, she noticed a folded sheet of paper she hadn't seen before. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, revealing her mother's handwriting, delicate but resolute. It was the last piece, the missing heartbeat to everything they had uncovered. The letter wasn't long, but every word felt etched into time. If you're reading this, it began, then you already know too much and have lost more than you ever should have had to. I never wanted this for you. I wanted birthdays and books and safe arms around you. But the world we lived in didn't allow that, not for truth-tellers, not for mothers who refused to look away. The ink smudged where tears had clearly fallen, hers or Sadie's, she couldn't tell. We tried to stop it. Your father and I. And for a moment we thought we had. But when silence grew louder than conscience, they came for us. I ran with you until I couldn't run anymore. Sadie swallowed the silence pressing against her chest, and then at the very end came the line that would never leave her. Justice comes late, my love, but it comes. And you, if anyone, are the only light strong enough to lead the way. Her breath caught tears sliding down her cheeks, not just from grief, but from the weight of that faith. She closed the letter and held it close to her heart, knowing now that what they had done, everything they had endured, wasn't only for survival. It was for something bigger, for a promise made long ago, for a mother's hope that truth even buried would rise again through her children. In real life, we may never uncover a government conspiracy or rescue a child from a hidden lab, but the deeper lesson from Caleb, Sadie, Rachel, and Lily's journey speaks to something just as real: truth, no matter how deeply buried, matters. This story reminds us that silence, when driven by fear or pressure, can be just as dangerous as the wrongdoing itself. And yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, ordinary people's siblings, a forgotten mother, a quiet girl with rare blood, can become the sparks that ignite real change. One powerful takeaway is this: never underestimate the light you carry, even when the world around you feels dark. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes it hides its sins behind authority status or scientific jargon. But it's the courage to ask questions, to protect the vulnerable, and to speak up when others won't, that defines true justice. Whether you're a student, a parent, or someone just trying to do the right thing, your voice, your decisions, and your persistence matter more than you think. So protect what's precious. Pay attention to what's being erased. And always remember, delayed justice is not denied justice so long as someone somewhere keeps fighting for it. If this story moved you, made you think, or gave you a new perspective, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Caleb and Sadie's shoes? Would you have run, fought, stayed silent? Let's talk. Don't forget to save this video if it spoke to your heart, and subscribe for more stories that blend emotional truth with real-life meaning. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.